Welcome to the channel. Welcome to Paper and Moose. Today is a history behind the paper episode where I've taken some ephemera that I've purchased from an auction. I've done a little research on it and I present to you more of the stories behind the paper. Today's a little bit of a somber episode. What I've researched, I actually found I guess you would call it a death letter written to a daughter by her mother as she was leaving to go away to the hospital. And with that letter, I also found a letter from the mother's nurse to the widowed husband, explaining some details that she wanted to share about his wife's passing. I did a little research, found a little bit more of the story, and I wanted to share it with you. So stay tuned. A sad episode, but history isn't always pretty sometimes. And this is, real life in 1897. So stay tuned as we delve into the history behind the paper. So the first letter that I want to read is the letter from the mother to her daughter. I'm going to be putting in some slides after, so you'll be able to see some close-ups of the letter and then the history behind the paper. But the mother writes this: "Dear little daughter, Mama is going to write this, so if she does not come back to you, you will have it to help you remember that the first wish of your mother's heart was that you might love and obey God, that you would read your Bible so you would learn. Do not think of me as in my grave, but as with Jesus, waiting for you and Papa and John to come. Mama's last prayer for you all is that you may be children of God. May God be with you all, keeping you until the end. Your loving mother, Hattie Evans. Remember to read and pray every day. Mama." The second letter, dated May 30th, 1897, Presbyterian Hospital, is the letter that Hattie's nurse wrote to her widowed husband. And that letter reads, "My dear Mr. Evans, did I make it quite clear to you about your wife's last thought being of you and her child? I felt so badly when you were here and do not remember if I did say enough about it. Her last words were to give her love to you both, and seldom have felt so drawn to a stranger as I did to Mrs. Evans, and never saw sweeter patience under suffering. It was most affecting to all. Regretting that I am too far away to render any neighborly assistance, believe me to be with heartfelt sympathy, very sincerely yours, Grace Stibbins, nurse." So here is the letter that Hattie wrote to her little daughter. The bottom right, on the right side, has Anna, and that is her daughter's name. This letter is not dated, so it's unsure if she wrote this, a couple months before she went away, which I'm assuming is where she went to the hospital, or if she wrote this a couple of days. I'm going to guess, based on some later research that I did, but I will show you that perhaps it was maybe when she first was sent to the hospital. So perhaps a couple of years or a couple of months prior. This is the letter that the nurse, Grace, who took care of Hattie, sent to Mr. Evans. And this is dated May 30th, 1897 at the Presbyterian Hospital. This date varies from the date that is listed on Ancestry.com for Hattie's death. It is just a couple days later in June. So that's not a big discrepancy, but it is one. But I trust the writer of this letter more than I trust some dates that are on Ancestry.com, because this is, an actual document written at this time. But reading this, you can just feel the hurt that Hattie's nurse felt, and her sympathy, her genuine sympathy that she extended towards the family. So this is one of the trees that I found for Hattie. Her last name was Vale. I couldn't find an instance where she actually changed her name over to Evans. It is Vale. As you can see from the screen, the person that made this tree doesn't have a lot of information at all. Now, the date of death is noted as June 4th, 1897. So again, a couple of days after the letter from Hattie's nurse, but there's no children listed on here. There is the marriage to Jacob, but that's it. So if you were to just do a search on Ancestry.com, come across this family tree, you'd be wondering, well, I have a letter that she wrote to a daughter, but the daughter is not on here. So this is one of the reasons why with Ancestry.com, though it is a great source of information, you do have to be careful sometimes at the information that you're looking at and the sources that you're looking at. You always want to do your research, as they say, to make sure that you're pulling from the most correct information. Now this other family tree is a lot more extensive. And if you can see, the person that created this tree, their last name is actually Vale. They have an extensive research collection on their family. So I think what I'm going to do is send them copies of the letter so that they can add them to their tree, and perhaps they'll be able to even tell me a little bit more information, about the Vale family and about Harriet. I would love to see a picture of her if one was available. But here you can see the extensive, lines with all the different dates, the birth of her brothers, the death of her parents. Over on the right-hand side, you see 1889, the birth of her daughter, Anna. So 1889, Harriet was 33 years old. Now, she died in 1897. Again, they have the date of June 4th, 1897. So there's that discrepancy. But so when she passed away, her daughter was only 8 years old. This is a census. Census offers great information. They're one of the best things on the Ancestry website. So this is from 1870, and you can see Harriet. Her name is outlined in yellow, and all of her family. Her father's name was John. He was a farmer, quite common. Her mother, Phoebe, was busy keeping house, and then her one brother, Charles, who was 17, he was a laborer. They were all born in New Jersey, and they attended school within that year, except for her sister Albright, who was 19 and was most likely out of school by that time. So this is where I found this and I thought, how interesting. This is a state census, 1895. Harriet's name is the last line, Harriet Vale. Again, she did not change her name over to Evans. And this is a listing of people that were inmates of, it says stated hospital over on the right under remarks. The page before this in this same census says inmates of state hospital. So this has me questioning, where was Harriet? Morris County, which is where the census was from, the hospitals included in that county was the insane asylum, which went by the names of the State Asylum for the Insane at Morristown, New Jersey, and then later the New Jersey State Hospital at Morris Plains. I do not want to jump to any conclusions about whether or not Harriet was at an insane hospital. The reasons for sending someone to an insane asylum during this time, the late 1890s, were varied. You didn't actually have to be insane. The Victorians, that Victorian era time period, so many different reasons why someone could have been sent away. But again, I don't want to jump to conclusions and I don't want to state that. All I know is that she was in a hospital at this time. And as you can see, this was 1895. The letter from the nurse was dated 1897. So did Harriet write the letter to her daughter in 1895 prior to her to being in this hospital? Unknown. But Harriet was in a hospital at least in 1895, so 2 years before the letter from the nurse to her husband, and then again 2 years before she died. So this is the 1900 census. Jacob is listed as a widower, and living with him is his mother, Mary, his daughter, Anna, and then John Vale, who was a relation to Hattie or Harriet. They were all living with Jacob. He is still a farmer at this time. This is the 1910 census. Jacob, again, of course, is listed as widowed. His daughter, Anna, is 19 at this time. She has no occupation listed. And then again, Jacob is still working on the farm. The 1920 census changes a little bit for Jacob's household. Anna and her husband, Frank, they now reside with Jacob. Of course, he is still working on the farm as it looks like probably the general manager. And then his son-in-law, Frank, is also working on a farm as a laborer. What's interesting to note in this census is that Jacob is no longer paying a mortgage on the home. So I assume that he was able to pay it off. But what's interesting is that it does not seem that Jacob ever remarried after the passing of his wife. This I thought was interesting. This is the registration card for Francis Charles Jacques, who was Anna's husband. He worked at Bakelite Company in Bound Brook, New Jersey. He was born in 1892. He has a very lovely signature, I think. His information on the right, he was 5'9", blue eyes and brown hair, a ruddy complexion. His other obvious physical characteristics that led me to put this in this slideshow, he had a scar on the center of his forehead and then a partially disabled right thumb. So how did he get those? One can guess possibly, through work. I'm sure there was a story behind that. And here we have their tombstone. So you have Evans and then Jacques. So Jacob and Harriet on the right side, and then you have Anna and Francis on the left. Anna passed away in 1974. So, the letters that I found, were they a part of her estate? I'm going to assume that they probably were. Anna and Francis, I believe, did have children. Some have recently passed away. But I definitely want to reach out to the person that listed all the, extensive research on Ancestry.com that is a Vale descendant, and pass along what I can to them and hopefully receive more information if they're willing to share about Harriet and the life that she led. So there is much more research that could be done in regards to Hattie and her family. I wish I could have found a picture of her. I wish I could, find her death certificate, which probably could be found given the right avenues, just to see what happened to her and, to learn more of her story and her life. Writing that letter, that was a part of life back then. You're in the late Victorian time period. Death was something that was talked about, something that they all face, everyone faces. But if you think of the Victorians and just their acts of mourning and their acts of grieving and how they were so in tune with it, that letter and the letter from the nurse doesn't seem out of place at all. They were acts of love and acts of kindness. As you can see with Ancestry.com, though it is a great resource, you do have to, keep focused, because not everything that's on there is the total truth. People have good intentions and they do their own research and they post it. You just have to make sure that you're fact checking and that you are, comparing your dates, because you want to make sure that your research is on point as possible. But again, it's a great resource. I highly recommend it. I use it a lot for my own family research and then for the other research that I do. So perhaps in the future, I'll delve more into this, Hattie Evans and her family, and see what happened to them all. But I thank you for joining. I hope that you enjoyed this history behind the paper. I do love doing research. I wish that I could spend all day doing it, because I could go down so many rabbit holes, which I often do, and that's why it takes me so long to do the research. So I have to kind of make it a little bit smaller so I'm focused. But again, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope that this encourages you to partake in your own research and to find the history behind the paper and all these great items that we collect. So thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe. This way you will always be connected with what I'm doing. And I hope that you all have a great day, and see you all later.